Welcome back to the channel. This is Set Sail with Grace Harbor. Today is August 22nd, and today we will be in Jeremiah 46 through 48. Today we get to shift gears a little bit from all of the judgments that God has passed on Israel and his punishment for their idolatry, and now we shift to all of the surrounding nations. I think it's important to note that in this time in history, every country had their own proprietary god. And so if you were in that country, you would make sacrifices to that god while you were under his authority. I think we will very quickly see that God is a God without country borders. He is God over Israel. He is also God in Egypt and God in Babylon and God over all the earth. So the first group of people that we're going to talk about is Egypt. Chapter 46 talks about their defeat on the banks of the river Euphrates. This is where Necho II, the same Necho that killed King Josiah, is defeated by Nebuchadnezzar at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. There's actually a lot of interesting references in here that I don't have time to get into, but I would encourage you to see if there's anything interesting and follow the rabbit trails. Some interesting symbolism about gliding like a serpent, the beautiful heifer. But ultimately, Egypt's sin against God was enslaving his people, and they were also a bad ally. Israel kept running to Egypt instead of God. And so the god Ammon of Thebes, that is talked about in chapter 46, verse 25, is the false god of Egypt. So God will defeat him and have his vengeance on Egypt. Interestingly enough, at the end of chapter 46, he doesn't really talk about, he does mention Israel, but not in the context of Israel and Judah. He refers to Jacob, which almost seems to be a unified vision of his people now that they're in exile. There is no more divided kingdom stage. Everyone is exiled. We're looking at a different historical phase for Israel. And so he now can talk to them as one people again. In chapter 47, we see the judgment on the Philistines. It says, before Pharaoh struck down Gaza, that happened when Necho II defeated the Philistines in Gaza in 609 BC, but ultimately the Philistines are defeated by Babylon in 603. What's the sin of the Philistines? We actually have to look to Ezekiel chapter 25, verse 15 for this, where it talks about they have revenge and malice of soul against Israel. God has been keeping track. The god of the Philistines is Baal, and while it's a little bit more hidden, I think in this chapter, if we look at verse 5, it talks about how long will you gash yourselves. This makes me think back to Elijah and the prophets of Baal when they have their two competing altars and they're cutting themselves to wake their god. Also talks about baldness has come upon Gaza. Both of these can be a sign of warning, but either way, it's Baal that God is defeating here. Lastly, we come to chapter 48 and talk about Moab. Moabites were actually distant cousins of the Israelites through Lot, Abraham's nephew. And Moab has kind of an on-again, off-again relationship with Israel. Sometimes they're enemies, sometimes they're allies. At one point when Israel was leaving Egypt in Judges 11:17, they refused to allow the Israelites to pass through their land, so they forced them to go a long way around. They also hired Balaam to curse Israel. So they don't have a very good track record of having a great relationship with Israel. In verse 11 of chapter 48, it says, Moab has been at ease. This is a country where they are very rich. They're winemakers. They haven't really had a lot of unrest, but that's all about to end. It says, ultimately, their sin is the sin of pride in verse 29. We have heard of the pride of Moab. He's very proud. If it says it twice, it probably really means it. And look, of his loftiness, his pride, and his arrogance, and the haughtiness of his heart. I think the problem is pride. Ultimately, their economy will be destroyed. If you look at verse 32, your summer fruits and your grapes, the destroyer has fallen. I have made the wine cease from the wine presses, and then later in verse 38, therefore the riches they gained have perished. The god of the Moabites is the god Chemosh, that was a popular god for child sacrifice. All of these countries have pulled Israel aside into idolatry, and God has kept count. In fact, if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 35 through 43, it's very interesting to read that in the context of what we see here in Jeremiah. This is where God says, vengeance is his, and he's kept track. He's kept track of the times his children have been misled or betrayed or enslaved or treated badly, and he's ultimately executing his vengeance. He has no borders. He has no limits to his kingdom. He has authority over all the earth. And Ezekiel says it really well when it's talking about all of these similar prophecies. Ezekiel and Jeremiah are contemporaries. Ezekiel to the people in Babylon, and Jeremiah to the remnant and those in Jerusalem, and then later in Egypt. But in Ezekiel it keeps repeating, they will know that I am the Lord their God. There is no way for anyone to deny that he is the Lord God. When he executes power, gives power, takes away power, anywhere and everywhere.